All right, I need your help. I need your help. Hey, thank you, young scholars, faculty, and staff for joining me today. I know this may seem like it was the last moment, but it's such an important opportunity that I just couldn't pass it up for you all to meet someone who is right next to human history, which is so important, living history. So before we do that, just a few norms. I just want y'all to make sure that you are giving our guests that are here today the utmost pine tree welcome and respect, being model young scholars today, which I know you are and can be. So keep that in mind. He's going to talk to you about his experiences, and also at the end there'll be a chance to be able to answer some questions. Ask some questions. First of all, do you all know who Nelson Mandela is? You heard that name, Nelson Mandela, in history? All right, just a show of hands, Nelson Mandela. Raise your hands. Okay, that's good. Thank you very much. This gentleman that I'm introducing you to today, he was Nelson Mandela's bodyguard. All right, so he has a lot of experiences right up close to some important history. So listen to him talk today. He's going to deliver you a message of hope and inspiration and service, and just give him your all due respect and attention. But before I do that, I just want to thank the people who helped make this happen today. I want to thank the chair of the Stonecraft Women of Worth Connections, Sierra Evans and Robin Reese, the Stonecraft Regional Director. These are extraordinary women with purpose who work diligently to ensure that our communities are connected to valuable resources and special features such as our dynamic speaker here today. So without much further ado, I'd like to introduce and bring to the stage today Mr. Rory Steyn. Give him a big hand.
Thank you, Dr. Cleo, and good morning to all of you. Thank you for giving me some of your time. I hope that it won't be time that is wasted, but rather time that you find valuable. I just want to make one or two introductory comments, and I hope you can understand me. I don't have an accent, by the way. Y'all have an accent. I feel very comfortable in a school environment because, like Dr. Cleo, my wife of some 37 years now, I'm showing my age, is a principal herself. You would call it a middle school. We call it a prep or a preparatory school. She's the headmistress back where I live in South Africa. And I've been a parent. We have 3 boys. And I've also been the spouse of a staff member. So I kind of understand how schools work, and I'm comfortable in this environment, and I wanted you to know that. I thank you for inviting me. May I just encourage you, having heard what Dr. Cleo said, to take that tour to Washington, D.C., to your capital. I'm not an American, but if I'm in Washington, D.C., 100% irrespective of the weather, rain, hail, or shine, I'm going to take a run through that mall, and I'm going to go to the Lincoln Memorial, and I'm going to stand there and read the Gettysburg Address again. President Lincoln was a phenomenal person. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about another president who was, he was the most famous man in the world when I served him in the 1990s, but we'll get to that. So as your colleagues, your friends at the back there come in, welcome everybody. Can I just ask you, show me your hand if you know what shirt this is that I'm wearing. Look at it carefully. I'll give you a clue. There's something going on in France, as you say. The French say France, and where I come from, we say France. So right now in France, there's what's going on. Anybody know what's happening in France? Man, I'm talking to football players here, you know? I don't know why you need all that padding. This shirt is the Scottish national rugby team shirt. The World Cup. The Rugby World Cup is happening in France right now. We're about halfway through the tournament. I just came from there on Sunday. My bag didn't, but that's another story for another day. And it's been an incredible journey for us as a family. My entire family, all 3 of my boys, 2 of them are married, so their wives, and my youngest, who I'll talk about in a minute, his girlfriend came with us. And we were over in France, visiting the Rugby World Cup. My wife was born in Glasgow in Scotland, hence this is called the thistle, which is the national flower of Scotland. So they play in this shirt. On Saturday, Scotland are playing Ireland. One of them's going home, one of them's going through to the playoffs, to the quarterfinals. So best you be rooting for Scotland. Yeah, thank you. Oh, Flower of Scotland, that's the national anthem, it's beautiful. So let me tell you a little bit about this man that it was my privilege to serve in the 1990s. Anybody know when President Mandela came out of prison? If you know your history, he came out of prison in February of 1990. When did he go to prison? 1964. I was born in 63. And I came to serve him through a bunch of circumstances that we perhaps don't have all the time to go into today. But you can have a look at that. There's stuff online that you can find. Nelson Mandela spent 27 years incarcerated in prison for his political beliefs. In 1990, I was a youngish cop sitting in my office in Johannesburg, South Africa, when at what you would call the, what do you call it? What is the opening address of the president every year in Congress called in the United States? I forget. We call it the State of the Nation address. Is it the State of the Union? State of the Union. So at the State of the Nation address, the last white state president of South Africa, if you know the history of my country, the white people in those days were only 14% of the population, 14%, and yet they were the government. That was the government that instituted this iniquitous system known as apartheid. By the way, do you know what that word means? Apartheid. That's how you say it, not height, hate, apartheid. The last 4 letters of the word apartheid are a suffix, like ness in English. So you have goodness and kindness and apartness. That's what the word means. So the philosophy of that government that came in 1948, just after the war, was that South Africans, based on the color of their skin, had to take separate developmental paths. And black South Africans could only live in certain parts of the country, and they were the worst parts of the country. And white people, being about 15 to 20% at the time in 1948, had the best of the land. Jobs were reserved or denied based on the color of people's skin. So there's racism in every country. I know there's racism in your country, but only South Africa legislated it. So that system known as apartheid was a set of laws. Mandela resisted those laws. African people didn't have a voice. They didn't have a forum through which they could further their political and social and cultural ideals. They didn't have a voice in any elected form of government. They weren't allowed to vote until 1994. So, as I said, in February of 1990, the last white state president announces at the State of the Nation address that he is going to unban the political parties that were all banned under apartheid and release the political prisoners, including Nelson Mandela, unconditionally from prison. And the TV was kind of on in the corner of my office somewhere, and I thought, did I really hear him say what he just said? And then we all started to pay attention. That was 1990. I served in a division of the South African police force at the time called the security branch. That was the division within the police that looked after crimes against the state. You have that in your country today. But, of course, it was crimes against the apartheid state that had just been announced out of existence. So what did they do with me? They said, well, you, young lieutenant, quite inexperienced, a little bit green, go and start a VIP protection section within the security branch. That's what I did. So that's 1990. 1994, we have our first democratic election. Guys, this is historic, because up until 1994, only white South Africans could vote. Think about what version of democracy that represents. 14% of the population get to determine the future of 100% of South Africans. Crazy. So now they say it's open to everybody above the age of 18 years can register and vote. And there are historic images of people standing in queues that snaked like this across football fields for hours in the hot African sun to vote because they'd been denied that privilege all of their lives. They stood in those queues. And as I say, the helicopter shots from above are part of our imagery that defines who we are as South Africans. The other one, of course, is when Nelson Mandela walked out of prison on the 11th of February 1990, and he's got his fist in the air and he's holding his wife by the other hand. It's an iconic image. He goes to the Grand Parade in Cape Town, because the prison was down in the Cape. And he makes his first speech as a free man, and he says, South Africa is for all her people, both black and white. And this cynical cop sitting in his office again, listening to that stuff, is going, yeah, whatever. Of course you're going to say that. That's the party line. I didn't expect to hear anything different. But come 1994, I'm still the commander of this VIP unit that I started 4 years earlier, and I get a telex. You guys don't even know what a telex is. It's not even a fax, man. And it says that the newly inaugurated President of the Republic of South Africa will fly by helicopter from the Union buildings, that's like your White House, to a soccer stadium 40 miles to the south. The Union buildings are in Pretoria, that's the nation's capital, and Johannesburg is its biggest city and the economic hub of our country. That's only 40 miles south. He's going to fly to a soccer stadium and he's going to attend a soccer match. Who does that? Who goes to a soccer match about half an hour after swearing the oath of office and becoming the first democratic president? Well, Nelson Mandela did that. So I thought, well, I better go to that rugby stadium and do what we do. So we bring the sniffer dogs through the president's suite. I post my men and women at the entrances and exits once we've checked that there's nothing funny in there. And we await this helicopter, which flies now south, lands on the roof of the technical college next door, and the motorcades scoop him up, drive him around the corner, up a vehicle ramp, and into the reception hall behind the president's suite. So if you can picture this, where you all are sitting, that's the reception hall, polished wooden floor. Behind me, where the curtains are, that's the doors to the president's suite. And so the motorcade stops here. The Football Association officials welcome their new president. He doesn't go into the president's suite. He goes straight into the elevator over here, down to the dressing room level of the stadium, 65,000 seat stadium, and walks out onto the field where the two teams that are playing are lined up. South Africa, as the hosts, are playing Zambia, who are the continental champions. They were the holders of the African Cup of Nations. This is soccer. And there's this tournament that's now known as the Nelson Mandela Inauguration Challenge. That became an annual event. He greets the teams. He goes back into the tunnel. He comes back up the elevator. He apologizes to his host. He says, gentlemen, excuse me. I've got 184 of the world's biggest VIPs waiting for me to host them for lunch. I've got to fly back to Pretoria. From America that day was Hillary Clinton as First Lady and Alan Tipper Gore as the vice presidential couple. They were there. And a whole bunch of other VIPs. They say, of course, sir. He gets into the car, and I take a step back, waiting for the motorcade to leave to go back around the corner to the helicopter, and nothing happens. That vehicle doesn't move. And we see him trying to open the door, which may sound simple to you today, but it's a 3.8-ton armored BMW. You don't just flick an elbow when you're in your late 70s. So the team leader calls the bodyguard in the car and says, hey, why does he want to get out? That guy says, I don't know, he said nothing to me. So the team leader opens the door. President says nothing to him. He climbs out of the car that he's just got into. And remember, he's got this pressing engagement in Pretoria. He walks around the hood of the BMW and he starts heading towards the vehicle ramp at the back of this reception hall where he should be driving out to go to the helicopter. And the only person standing there is a police colonel. In his full blue uniform, he's got the stars and castles over here. He's got some scrambled egg stuff on his cap. And the president walks directly towards him, and he's got no idea why the president is coming to him. And we don't know either. We're just tagging along. There's maybe 15 of us, 12 of us. And he stops in front of him and puts out his hand, and he says to him, Colonel, I just want to tell you that today, you have become our police. He said, I'm now the president of this country, but I want you to know that from today forward, there's no more you and us. You are our police too. Guys, this old warrior had the lines on his face to show that he'd pretty much seen and done a lot in a long career, and he started to cry. And the tears ran down his face, and they were dripping like this onto that polished wooden floor. And the president just patted him on the shoulder, and he said, it's okay, Colonel. I just needed you to hear that from me today. And he turned on his heel, and he went back to the car and said, let's go to the helicopter. Now look, if you smacked me on the nose, I would have been less surprised than what I heard him say to my colleague, that colonel. By the way, my rank was only one lower. I was a lieutenant colonel at the time. And I did not believe the stuff he said 4 years earlier, as I described to you very briefly, when he went to the Grand Parade and he said that stuff. South Africa is for all her people, both black and white. And now I hear him say this. It's not a media moment. There were a handful of people that heard it, but it was that important to President Mandela that on the day that he realized his own freedom from the oppression that was the apartheid system and that of his people, and he had all the power now. He's the president. He gets out of the car telling 184 big shot VIPs, you guys can just wait a few minutes. That colonel needs to hear this from me. And that colonel, people, please understand, he's an apartheid-era police colonel. He represented the system that pursued Mandela, arrested him, tried him, convicted him, and sent him to prison for life. Narrowly escaping the death penalty, by the way. That guy represented all of that. He climbs out of the car and he goes and tells him, you are our police today. And from that day, I started to question all of my own upbringing and whatever it was culturally and socially that informed my existence as a 33 or 34-year-old man at that stage. And you know, Mandela is on record, folks. He has said, it is better to sit down and to talk to your enemy than to fight with him. That from a man who was trained in military warfare. He said it's better to sit down and talk to your enemy rather than to fight with him. This is a man who came out of prison after 27 years, 18 of those years on Robben Island. Robben Island's like Alcatraz. It's a little island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, just offshore of Cape Town. Freezing cold, shark-infested waters. 18 years in a cell about 6 by 9 feet. You can go there today and see that cell. And he said, let me talk to my enemy rather than to fight with him. Let me extend the hand of forgiveness and reconciliation rather than the fist of revenge and retribution. Guys, there's a lesson in that for all of us. Talking to Dr. Cleo before I came in here, and talking from deep personal experience, as I said, we have 3 boys. My youngest son, Craig, was like you. We call it matriculation, you call it graduation. He was a grade 12 student in a high school in South Africa 3 years ago. In grade 10, you call that a sophomore year, I think. Grade 10, he gets a traumatic brain injury playing rugby. And he cannot complete his studies in grade 10, 11, or 12. Gets to grade 12, has to graduate or matriculate, and sees this massive elephant there that is just too big to eat. And he descends into some quite serious depression and anxiety. And my wife and I and the rest of our family for 3.5 years since then until very recently, when he came through that, had to deal with this. Not just the brain injury in those vital years of school, but the side effects. And one day we were standing in the kitchen, getting ready to prepare dinner. And he said to me, Dad, you and Kirby, that's my brother who's 2 years younger than me. Remember, I was born in 63. So all my schooling was in the 70s, and I matriculated in 81, graduated in 81. He said to me, you and Kirby, you come from the golden era. I said, what do you mean by that, my boy? He said, Dad, there was no social media when you guys grew up. You guys grew up in the great outdoors. We have fantastic weather in South Africa, the best climate. We were outdoors all of the time. He says, you don't have these pressures. So I want you to know that as you prepare to leave high school, where you are big fish in a little pond, if I may use a cliche, and you're about to step out into the real world where you may become smaller fish in a very big pond out there. I understand what it is that you're dealing with when it comes to matters of stress and anxiety. Even as a cop, in my day, it was cowboys don't cry. There were no mental health counselors available to cops like me. I saw some horrific things done back in the day under the apartheid system. So I started my police career in 1982 under apartheid South Africa. I finished my police career in 1999 on the very day that Mandela worked his last day in office. Like you, our presidents can only serve 2 terms of office by law, but they are 5-year terms. Mandela only served 1 5-year term intentionally because he was in his 80s by then. Sorry if that resonates with you guys at the moment. And he realized that he's too old for this job, man. He needs to get out. But more importantly than that, he needed to send a message to other African leaders that were clinging on to power, who would become presidents for life because they got used to the power and the wealth, the enormous wealth that it bought them, stashed away in some Swiss bank. He wanted to send a message to them to say, hey, it's okay to step out of power, hand it over to the younger generation. So I want you to know, and I'll close with this and then we can have some questions. I'll take any question you want to ask. But I want you to know that as you leave the relative comfort of a grade 12 matriculation class or a senior high school class where you're safe and secure, you guys are you're the seniors at this high school. And you're going to step out into the big bad world where anxiety might become an issue. There are plenty of resources available for that. First of all, use them. But I know, because I understand a little bit about Texas, because I'm hosted by Robin, and she and her husband Terry live here, right here in Longview. Guys, there is a God in heaven that you can talk to at any time. And I'll leave it at that. Do not think that you have to fight any battle that you face mentally or physically or in any other realm on your own. You don't have to do that when there's a God who tells you that he loves you. And he loves you because he created you. You are his child. So let me stop there and open it up now to any questions that you want to ask me. Go ahead. Raise your hand and ask a question. There's one. Yes, ma'am.
Sorry.
It's okay.
When President Mandela was in power, what did you do for those 5 years?
Oh, good question. Did you all hear the question? The young lady asked me, when President Mandela was in power for 5 years, what did I do? Because I mentioned that I served him, and I should have told you that. So because I was the head of the VIP protection unit in Johannesburg, when President Mandela was released from prison, remember I told you it was down in the Cape, he came up to Johannesburg, which is my city, and he had both a home and an office there. So this is like your president not living in the White House. He chose not to live in the official residence next to the Union buildings in Pretoria because he'd been in jail for 27 years and he had 4 young grandsons, 4 boys. The eldest, Mandla, was at university at the time. Ndaba, the second one, was at high school like you, and Andile and Mbuso were little kids. I mean, Andile was still in his diapers at the time, running around the home there. And he had missed his 2 daughters all their lives growing up because he was away for 27 years. And he wanted to not miss that opportunity to live with his grandsons. So he bought a home in Johannesburg and he lived in that home in my town. And so because I was the head of the VIP unit, I spent my time, this is since 94 when he became president, up to January of 96. I would go and do what we in the trade call advanced security. So any venue that he spoke at, any meeting that he attended, any political speech that he gave, me and my team would go in advance and secure that venue. Then the protection team would bring him through. In January of 96, my phone rang, and it was the commander of the PPU, the Presidential Protection Unit. It's like your Secret Service. That's the unit that protects the head of state. And he said to me, Rory, one of the team leaders is leaving South Africa. He's going to study in Canada. He's still there. He said, you're the right rank for that post. The president knows you and the teams know you. Would you consider applying? So I said, well, give me 24 hours. I need to discuss this with my wife. I did that. We agreed I should take the job, phoned him back the next day and took the job. So for the 5 years, from day one, which was the day of the soccer match, until the day he stepped out of office 5 years later, I was involved with the protection of Nelson Mandela. And the last 4 years of those 5, I was one of his protection team leaders. So we had 2 teams in Pretoria, where the nation's capital is, and 2 teams down in Cape Town, because we've got this crazy governmental structure where the parliament, which is like your Senate or Congress, is in Cape Town, but the seat of government is 1,000 miles north in Pretoria. So we have 2 capitals. We actually have 3, but we won't go there. We have 2 capitals, and we had 2 teams in Cape Town, 2 in Pretoria, and I was the team leader of one of those 2 teams. So I served in that capacity for the 5 years that he was our president. Thank you for your question. Who's got another question? Yes, sir. What was I taught? I was taught, you all hear the question. This young man asked me, what was I taught growing up about people who didn't look like me? You know, the best way I can answer that question is to tell you that we in South Africa have these wonderful African women who work in our homes. They work in our homes, and you can ask Robin Rees. She had one when she and her husband spent time in South Africa when he was head of McDonald's. They work in our homes as housekeepers. They look after our kids. They clean our homes. They iron our clothes. They make our beds. It's a wonderful, wonderful quality of life we enjoy in South Africa. And many of those women cannot get other work. Many of them will be, at best, I wouldn't say semi-literate, but not all of them would have gone through to grade 12. Many of them would have left school at the end of the 7th grade, which is primary school for us. So our schools are broken up into 7 years and 5 years. I know that you only have 4 years of high school. We have 5, grade 8 to 12. And many of them would have left school in grade 10. And they can't get other work, so they work in our homes, and they're wonderful. And they live on our property. I've got a lady who's worked for my family for 24 years. Her name is Esther. Good biblical name, Esther. And she's part of our family. In the holidays, in the school holidays, her kids will come from where they live with her mother. So the kids in South Africa are very often raised by their grandparents. She'll have her kids come and stay with her on our property until they're 6 years of age and then they need to go to school. So when I grew up as a less than 6-year-old, I played with our maid's kids in the back garden. Little black kid, come the age of 6, I go to that school and he goes to that school. The education in that school for black people was way inferior to the education that I enjoyed. I enjoyed wonderful, free, state-paid-for education. And it was almost as if they inverted the education budget to the demography of South Africa. So about 85% of the budget went to the 15% who looked like me. And we are still paying for that today. Our education in South Africa is in a complete shambles, Dr. Cleo. It's a mess. And it's because of that. It's because it's the baggage of apartheid. You know, whatever you do in life, guys, God can forgive you. The person that you hurt can forgive you. You can spend time doing penance, but there will be consequences. And the consequences of this Bantu education policy that my country had means that we've got shockingly underprepared teachers teaching our students in an inferior way. So we have wonderful private schools there, the best The best private schools for those who can afford it. For those who can't, you're subjected to that mess. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of me saying, when I grew up, you don't ponder stuff like that when you're 6 years old. You don't ask, hey, Dad, why is he going to that school and I'm going to that school? But as maturity comes and experience and you learn that it was normal for me. Not much changed in 94 for me. But for black South Africans, a lot changed. But we were told in our schooling system, in the church, and in the media. The apartheid ideology controlled the media. It controlled the school curriculum. The history that we were taught was, and as I say, in some cases, the church even defended apartheid. So that's what I grew up with. So I thought that kind of segregation of a society based on the color of your skin was normal. And it was only when I heard him say what I told you I heard him say to my colleague, the Colonel, that I started to question all of that upbringing. And as I say, I was in my early 30s, my mid-30s then. And I was trying to understand what it is that I had come to believe was normal and found out that it actually wasn't normal and that I had to change my own thinking and my own mindset. And I'm living proof. Guys, if you think that a man can't change, I'm here to tell you today that I had to change. I once believed that all of that rubbish was normal. And I grew up with a lot of prejudice in my heart that I now understand was anything but normal. And so when Nelson Mandela said, we're going to build a new South Africa for all her people, black and white, I said, okay, sir, I will buy into that. I'll give it a shot. And then, of course, I was in this wonderful privileged position because I was front and center, and I watched him change our country over 5 years, and he changed me very profoundly. So how I view race and history in my own country today is very different to how it was when I grew up. I hope that answers your question. Yes, ma'am. Where are you?
Right.
Oh, yeah, there. Yes, ma'am.
Earlier you mentioned in your speech that Nelson Mandela served one time because it was important for him to pass the baton to different generations or the younger generation, right? How can the younger generation be intentional about receiving that baton and carrying themselves accordingly to be able to handle that?
That's a great question. Did you all hear that question? This lady is clearly a teacher. She has a loud voice, but I'll repeat it anyway. The question is, I said that Mandela wanted to hand over the reins of our country to a younger generation. And the question, if I summarize it or précis it accurately, is how can the younger generation be intentional about grasping that baton that has been passed on by the older generation? Well, let me start by saying, ma'am, that we were well on our way a few years ago to undoing a lot of the good that South Africa had done and become under Mandela. You know, before Mandela, South Africans were the polecat of the earth, of the world. There were international sanctions. Our sporting teams couldn't compete internationally. We weren't allowed to participate in the Olympics. We weren't allowed to play in rugby or soccer or cricket World Cups. There was a boycott by performing artists. They wouldn't come to South Africa. They wouldn't perform in our country. And there were economic sanctions imposed by the United Nations on South Africa. So South Africa was quite isolated because we isolated ourselves. Where was I going with this? So handing the torch, so passing the baton. I've no idea why I mentioned that, but it'll probably come to me in a minute. I'm getting old, I'm sorry. So President Mandela takes this very conscious decision not to seek a second term of office. In fact, in the last of those 5 years, he had already handed over the reins of the country to the deputy president. You call it a vice president, we call it a deputy president. And it was President Thabo Mbeki who succeeded him. And he was going to serve two terms, but he was ousted by oh, that's where I was going. So then we got Zuma, who was just an absolute crook, a criminal running our country. And corruption was so endemic and embedded that the economy was basically feeding itself and killing itself at the same time. And we were well on our way to undoing a lot of that good that Mandela had done. And that's why, Dr. Cleo, when I get asked, because my wife's in education, I get asked to speak at matric graduation or valedictory services often. And I always grasp the opportunity, which is why I grasp this one, to come and speak to your generation, guys. Because it's so important to me that you do not forget the lessons that Mandela taught us. What did Mandela teach us? Well, he taught us it's better to sit with your enemy and talk to him than to fight with him. He said, here's the hand of forgiveness and reconciliation rather than the fist of revenge and retribution. What is Mandela known for? Reconciliation, goodness, kindness, nation building, all positive steps. And that's how the young generation, that's how you all can be intentional about, even though you're not South Africans. Mandela was an international statesman. They called him the president of the world. And I can tell you, I wasn't there personally, but my colleague Sam was. He came to a reception at the White House. I think Clinton was the president. And there were all these heads of state there. Nobody wanted to know anything about Bill Clinton. Everybody wanted a piece of Mandela. And they were lining up to get time, to get face time with him. And they, in and of themselves, were powerful men and women with powerful positions. So do not forget the lessons that Mandela taught us, guys. I'm living proof that a man can change. You can get on with people that are very different from you. We in the PPU, in the Presidential Protection Unit, if you've seen, can anybody put up your hand if you've seen a movie, it's a Clint Eastwood movie called Invictus. Anybody seen the movie? There, 1, 2, and 1 at the back. That's your homework. I'm giving you homework today, okay? Go and watch Invictus. It's the story really about one day, the 24th of June, 1995. South Africa wins the Rugby World Cup. And President Mandela, as the president of the host nation, hands the Webb Ellis Trophy to the Springbok. That's it's our national animal, and it's the emblem on our rugby shirt. It's a Springbok. It's a little antelope about that high that can jump about that high. And he hands the World Cup to Francois Pienaar on this historic day. It's about that one day, but the story it's told, you'll see the bodyguards fighting, the black and the white bodyguards fighting. It happened. We found a way. Right now, just yesterday, on WhatsApp, I hope you all use WhatsApp, on the WhatsApp group that we have for the PPU, everybody that served in the Mandela era is on a WhatsApp group. One of our guys is critically ill in hospital. He has a very high fever and infection, and the message was posted there, and we all saw it, and the message of condolences came. We are a united people today because of the man who we served. Nobody sat us down and told us, hey, you're protecting the president's life and limb, but you also have a responsibility to protect his legacy, his reputation, and what he stood for. We just got that. And we're very proud of the fact that today, black and white, from white cops who were hunting these so-called freedom fighters that we considered to be terrorists, we wanted to arrest them, they wanted to evade us. History threw us together and told us to protect the most famous man in the world. Imagine that responsibility. Well, by the grace of God alone, we figured it out. And we were able to do that. It wasn't like that in the beginning. Go watch the movie, you'll see what I'm talking about. I think, Dr. Cleo, that bell is telling me I need to shut up and get off the stage. Thank you for having me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Black Scholars. You are dismissed to advisory. I'll let you teachers know they can make